I met him 15 years ago. I was told there was nothing left. No reason, no conscience, no understanding, and even the most rudimentary sense of life or death, of good or evil, right or wrong. I met this 6-year-old child with this blank, pale, emotionless face and the blackest eyes, the devil's eyes. I spent 8 years trying to reach him, and then another 7 trying to keep him locked up, because I realized that what was living behind that boy's eyes was purely and simply evil.
What do we do?
He's been here once tonight. I think he'll come back. I'm gonna wait for him.
I still think I should notify the radio and television.
No. If you do that, they'll see him on every street corner. They'll look for him in every house. Just tell your men to keep their mouths shut and their eyes open.
I'll check back in an hour.
Robin Hood and Little John walking through the forest, laughing back and forth at what the other has to say. Reminiscing this and that and having such a good time. Oodle-lolly, golly, what a day. Never ever thinking there was danger in the water they were drinking, they just guzzled it down. Never dreaming that a scheming sheriff and his posse was watching them and gathering around. Robin Hood and Little John running through the forest, jumping fences, dodging trees and trying to get away. Contemplating nothing but escape and finally making it. Oodle-lolly, golly, what a day. Oodle-lolly, golly, what a day.
Hello, everyone. This is Jim, and welcome back to Stuff We've Seen. And now, he's just arrived on the last flight into LaGuardia Airport, recently promoted to youth propaganda minister for the Covington Catholic High School in Park Hills, Kentucky, Teal. Congratulations on the promotion.
Thank you. One of my first acts in this new job is going to be the promotion of a backlash against Bohemian Rhapsody.
Yes. Make Queen great again.
Yes, make Queen great again. All we need is just to listen to the music. That would have been a good idea for the movie if they just had some of the music in it instead of just little clips from the songs.
Hey, good news for all you kids in the Covington Catholic High School. I've heard that for graduation, there's going to be a special guest speaker, Brian Singer. He's not confirmed yet, but I think they're trying to get him. Anyways, listen, kids. Today on the program, we've got an actual guest on the program, an early adopter, listener of, and maybe an old friend of ours as well. We will call him.
Shout out.
Oh, see, he's jumping in already. It's a shout out to Bill from Queens.
Bill from Queens.
Bill from Queens. Great. Hey, great long-time listener, first-time caller.
First, yes.
It's great to have you here, Bill.
Fantastic. Well, that's, but I just want to tell you, thank you for having me on. Enjoyed the show tremendously. It's something I've been listening to going to work, and I just got to say, I've listened to a couple of the episodes more than once. And what I really like about it is that not only just sort of talking about films that, I had no, awareness of really, and, hadn't been paying attention to, that I really wanted to go check out. But also what I also really liked was the way that you were talking about your first film going experiences, whether it was LTD, LTD, or Teal, especially also you talking about seeing Aguirre, Wrath of God, and Jimmy, just all of those absolutely god-awful 70s Disney movies before Michael Eisner took over, and everything that we all suffered through in childhood. All of that just brought back, a whole bunch of memories, and and just also the fact that with my own kids, you kind of see that it just was a very different time and a very different way of going to the movies and experiencing them than you see now.
It's so different now, isn't it, with Netflix? And my kids just have access to everything. Totally different kind of thing. Let me ask you something, Bill. What was the first movie you saw in the theater?
Okay. I'm going to think that one of the first theatrical experiences that I remember, and I know it's pretty early because it was before my little sister was born, and I think it was Robin Hood, the Disney Robin Hood. I saw it at Radio City Music Hall.
Oh, wow.
Wow. Oh, what a cool experience.
And that was, they had all kinds of like Disney paraphernalia that they were selling out in the lobby. I remember that. And, it was just a big deal that we had taken the subway in to meet my dad, and he had come from work, and, and it was like going into a cathedral. Just
right.
The size of it as a little kid, it just was like amazing. And, the movie, for a little kid, it's just, I suppose I followed it, but that is the first memory that I have. What really I remember is, again, more of the family experience of going, which is what I really enjoyed about, the early episodes you were talking about, the way that we would go to the movies. It was, really very much often early on a family thing. I mean, for you with your sister and stuff is a little different.
Right.
But yeah, that's my first memory, and it really, really stays with me. I must have been, I'm going to say 3.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. So really a early memory.
Yeah. But again, it was just the experience of going to Radio City is the part that kind of stands out. I
try whenever possible to give my kids that experience, which is why, we try a few times a year, go back to see the relatives in Massachusetts and maybe go to an IMAX film, just because it's that bigger than life experience of seeing a movie that just doesn't happen at the multiplex that we have, nearby. It's the feeling that you're taking part in an event somehow, that it's more than just, clicking on another movie, that there's something, it's an event. It's like a celebration almost. Right.
Absolutely. And I even remember times where, we would meet like our cousins at the movies, like, families would kind of meet up. I mean, I know Jim was talking about how you'd go out with the kids during Christmas and everything. But there was a bit more of that quality where, you'd meet up in like a large group of people and, go to the movies. It was very interesting. I remember, I don't know why this just popped in my head, but I remember once going to the movies with my family. We were seeing The World According to Garp.
That would be a Teal family movie, wouldn't it?
Yes, that would be a Teal family movie. It was the holidays, and we all went to see World According to Garp, and we all wore the matching sweaters.
Wow.
I don't even have any words.
That's like you grew up in a Wes Anderson movie.
Yes.
Exactly.
It feels, yes, it was exactly, yeah, we, in our matching sweaters, seen World According to Garp, and it was a good family film.
Yeah, a lot of family moments, a lot of subject matter that you could discuss with the kid of any age.
What year was that? Anyway?
82.
82.
Oh, so I was 11. Okay.
Exactly. Which is why it's like the perfect age. At least in the early portion of the film, there was probably a time where he was 11. So
yeah.
Wasn't Ellen James?
Ellen James?
Parents, wasn't Ellen? That's remember the Society of People who?
Oh, that's right.
Who cut out their tongues.
That's right.
I mean, can imagine a movie like that. Like, what was going on in your head? Did you even understand a lot of it? Because you wouldn't have read the book yet, right?
Oh, I had not read the book. I knew John Irving. He was our neighbor when I was a kid.
Yeah, I was just thinking. I didn't know whether you'd want to say that or not.
Yeah, no, yeah. He was a neighbor, and so when the movie came out, it was like, let's go see John Irving's movie.
Did you know what? Like, did your family know what kind of books he wrote?
I don't. I think they knew, but they, this was. Wow, it's R-rated. Yeah, I don't know. This was. They thought this kind of movie was okay for us, and I did not get a lot of it. I do remember trying to explain some of it in school the next day, but but incest is really tough to, communicate.
No, that's Hotel New Hampshire.
Oh, that's Hotel New Hampshire.
I was going to say that. Did you watch that 2 years later at the drive-in as a double bill?
It was 2 years later, and we did go to the theater and see it. Yes,
it's the park. It's the driveway scene. Is the one in the car accident. That's
yes,
the scene.
Yes.
That's tough to explain. To the
that's
kids.
and that I did not get that scene really well. Yeah, I think my sister explained it to me, but yeah, no, that took me a little while to figure out. what exactly was going on.
That was the talk. That was the buzz about the movie. I remember,
Yes.
before I even seen it.
Oh, I mean, I remember the scene vividly too. It's really evocative.
So didn't you have another question that you wanted to ask, Bill?
I just wanted to know about Bill's first theatrical experience of Star Wars.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Because we're all in the same generation here, and so we all saw it in its original theatrical release.
Thank you for asking me, because that actually was, I remember it. I remember it really well. It was one of these things that I was a kid, and it was sort of going on in the background. I just sort of remember it was becoming a big deal, and everybody had seen it. And my family, we took a drive out to Long Island, and we saw it out in Long Island in, I think the theaters it was an RKO theater in Westbury. And so we went out, it was like, a whole thing that we drove out to go see it. I just was absolutely, it was one of those things where just my head exploded, and it changed my life. I mean, and I know that's sort of a cliche, but it's just one of those things that just completely blew me away. And I think I saw it then twice, but the intensity that of sort of like feeling that I had for the movie was just amazing. And I had the Star Wars record.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, and it plays little clips from the movie and is narrated in between.
Then it's narrated in between by, Roscoe Lee Brown. Here, the Imperial Stormtroopers come to see their Lord Vader. And it's just really fantastic. And so I listened to that record like 100 times, more. And, that, I had the trading cards. I remember all of the Kenner toys. A lot of my childhood is sort of around like stories of even kind of playing with that stuff. The story that I always love to tell about a kid who from down the block stole my Princess Leia. And he was an older kid. He was a stoner, and he carved with, I don't know, some sort of hot pen or something, or, some sort of, I don't know how he did it, but he carved a vagina into my Princess Leia.
What?
Oh my God.
Yes. And it was like solid plastic, and he like left it out on the street. And I remember feeling like absolutely like horrified. What I did was I took silly putty and filled it in to try and like cover it up, because I was so like, it was my Princess Leia, and I still wanted, but like at the same time I was just like, oh my God, it's just like, I hide it somehow. So I mean, I just think from little things like that you'll get a sense that like Star Wars made a very big big impression on my life, like really big.
It's interesting that the idea of the record too, the recording of it, right, is that at that time, this is like pre-home video, and you wanted something, any kind of connection you could get to the movie through these ancillary products. And they still exist now, but it's different because you can just go get the movie. But at the time, a comic book, a novelization, a toy, a record, anything, even a Star Wars TV special was something like,
Absolutely, and that's why everyone watched it.
Okay, so listen, gang, this was a nice little walk back down memory lane, but now we're going to walk down memory lane some more with our guest, Bill. We wanted to see what other movies during, maybe his formidable years made an impact, not necessarily even about the film, but something maybe about the story of it, the experience or something. So I think that Bill may have prepared.
Bill has an experience prepared for us.
I have a prepared experience, yes.
Let's hear it.
So the movie is Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid, directed by Carl Reiner. So my experience going to see it, my parents used to have comedy records of Steve Martin, and I'm sure you remember, people actually used to sit
and listen to comedy records. Yeah,
right. You'd have like company would be over, and like someone would put on a comedy record. And a lot of times, the kids, it was like, all right, you got to get out of here, because, some of the stuff was even a little edgy. So Steve Martin, I was a very, very big fan. I hadn't been allowed to see The Jerk.
That's because you don't have Teal's parents who took him at the age of 9.
Yeah, I was 8, and my dad took me to see The Jerk. Just the two of us.
You know, my mom used to get this Catholic newspaper called The Tablet, and it would say whether or not things were morally objectionable or not.
So this was sort of like, because the Hays Code had some connection to Catholicism. So this is sort of like an extension.
It's like the Hays Code never stopped. So Steve Martin always seemed to me that I thought he was fantastic. It was something that my older cousins, you know, talked about watching on Saturday Night Live. My mom and sisters are going away for the weekend, and it's my dad and I having like a stag weekend together, the two of us. And what has come out but Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. And it's PG. He says, yeah, you know, let's go see it. He wanted to go see a movie that he would actually like. More, he just didn't want my mom jumping on his back and stuff, you know? So we go to see Dead Men Don't Wear Plaid. To tell people again the concept of the movie, it's sort of like an homage to film noir. I just knew that it was like a private eye type movie going into it, that it was kind of like making fun of private eye movies, of Humphrey Bogart type movies. What they did, though, was they actually used, and this is before digital special effects, what they were able to do was use existing film clips from the 40s and 50s, mostly the late 1940s. And they were able to kind of create a story around these clips and incorporate the clips into them in a funny way. That's the concept of the movie. We're watching, we're having a great time. Immediately, you know, Rachel Ward walks in on it. She's like absolutely gorgeous, just black and white. She faints. You know, Steve Martin is just sort of, you know, making all these like insane jokes. He goes into, you know, he's in scenes with Burt Lancaster. He's in scenes with Humphrey Bogart. He's in scenes with all these people. And I don't know who a lot of these people are, you know, other than the obvious ones, but my dad's telling me as we're going through. This is all working really well, him incorporating his way into the movies and stuff. You know, he keeps yelling at, like, you know, Bogart to wear a tie and stuff, and it's funny stuff. So anyways, 44 minutes into the movie, and everyone's roaring and laughing, like having a great time. The movie's 88 minutes long, so it's the halfway point. Steve is finishing up a scene. I think he's like Jimmy Cagney's just shot him or something, or shot at him. And, you know, Rachel Ward is always like sucking the bullet out of his arm. That's one of like the running jokes. And all of a sudden it turns to color.
What?
And Charles Bronson starts running through a parking garage. And the audience at first was a little put off by the color change, but the audience start applauding and laughing and going nuts. This is the greatest, funniest thing ever, that we have now gone from golden, like, you know, sort of the age of film noir. We now have Charles Bronson somehow in the movie, and this movie is so zany and nuts. It's crazy. And everyone's like, you know, we were dying laughing. And then what happens is Charles Bronson is watching this couple. They're like tourists, and they're being mugged. And it's getting really violent, and they rip off the woman's shirt, and everyone's still on the edge of their seats, like waiting to laugh, like, oh boy, this is really going into some like Andy Kaufman kind of territory here. This is really something. All of a sudden, the movie stops after about 5 minutes of this like really intense like mugging, and nobody knows what's going on. And they come in and they say, we've lost the reel that's in between, or there was a mix-up with the reel. And this was Death Wish 2. And so that's it, we leave, and I don't see it again. I don't see either again until they're on video, like in 6 months. But, and then I see it like all the time. But it was just one of those things that I think that's an experience I can say no one really is going to have like ever again. It was quite an experience, but I mean, to me, it was one of these things that I really thought, wow, this is like some kind of crazy comedy, and turned out not. Like I said.
I like how you couldn't figure out that this is not the same movie. I had a little Death Wish 2 story myself. My dad would take me to see some horror movies and some, you know, rated R fare, even at the tender age of 12. And there was we'll call it a sword and sandal type flick coming out.
Right.
It was a sneak preview of a movie, the Albert Poon classic Sword and the Sorcerer.
Oh, yeah.
And so I thought it looked pretty cool, like an adventure movie, like a Raiders of the Lost Ark thing. So we decided we would go to the sneak preview of that. And the double bill, I guess it was leaving theaters, was Death Wish 2. I loved Death Wish 1 because this was one of these movies that was on the local Channel 38. They had this thing called Movie Loft with Dana Hersey. And he would play these movies. And my dad, if there was a good one, like Dirty Harry or something. And, of course, Death Wish, it has that sort of Dirty Harry vibe. My dad would watch it, and he would let me stay up to watch the whole thing. So sometimes my mom would like take my sister off to my grandmother's house, and I'd stay behind and watch these movies. So I had seen the Death Wish probably cut. It was on TV where they cut everything. So I hadn't seen any of the really violent parts of Death Wish. But I liked it, so I wanted to see Death Wish 2, and he was going to take me. So before that, the whole family went to eat at a Chinese food restaurant that is no longer with us, probably because it was always dirty. And I was
Health department shut it down.
I had some, Chinese food, and that was okay. And we watched Sword and the Sorcerer, and now the last time I saw Sword and Sorcerer, it was featured on Riff Tracks, which is the more adult version of Mystery Science Theater 3000.
Right.
And you quite don't realize what a bad movie is until years later you see them ripping it apart on the Mystery Science and go, oh, yeah, I guess this really was a horrible movie. But I loved it as a kid. And
I love the flying sword.
The flying sword, right, with the
missile
buttons.
Sword.
Yes.
I've never seen this movie.
Oh, it's a classic. But it's not it's not a classic in the good way, though.
Right. I guess, maybe I'll catch it on Riff Tracks.
Well, it's super. I mean, everything that you would never do in a movie today, in terms of being a sexist film, this film is. Bill's laughing because he's seen it. He knows, but that's okay. That's fine. Now, Death Wish 2 comes on. Something is starting to happen in me that I didn't realize is that slowly but surely I'm getting food poisoning from the Royal Hawaiian food. And it starts to coincide with a scene early on in the film, which is probably about the 20-minute mark, because this is where it propels Charles Bronson on his latest vigilante rage. His poor daughter, who was left mute and in a mental facility because she was abused in the first movie, she is attacked by this raging gang of 80s movies punks, because that's the
right.
Like in
you
know what those
they're
80s
classic.
Yeah, these 80s movies punks, they always had the same look and sort of a particular racial makeup where it was mostly white people dressed as punks and then one black person dressed as a punk. Am I correct?
Have leather jackets, and there's a guy with a mohawk.
The
eyeliner.
Yes.
Yes.
Exactly. So, and I'm assuming, I could be wrong, but I really feel like that was the group of punks in this film. And then there's a really, and I've never seen a thing like this before in film, there's a very brutal rape scene of his daughter, who had already been raped in the first movie. And as a kid experiencing this, I was having a gut reaction, a very uncomfortable reaction to what I was seeing because it was so horrible. But it was also something more. I was getting food poisoning.
Right.
And there was this reaction that it never...
The Ludovico technique.
Yeah, that's what it felt like. It felt like I was being strapped to the chair with my eyes were...
Given CRM 114.
Exactly. And so, and then so the feeling never really left. I was kind of enjoying myself. I mean, a 12-year-old, the way you view a movie then and thinking it's good and not crap. But I just that feeling never left. And when I walked out, I kind of thought, wow, I don't feel very well. That movie made me nauseous. Not thinking anything like that I got food poisoning. So we get in the car to go home. My mom picked us back up, and my sister was in there. And I didn't even make it out of the theater parking lot before I suddenly said, you got to pull over. I'm going to be sick. And that freaked my sister out. And I didn't quite make it out the window. And I puked all over the inside of the car. And it scarred my sister for life. Creating a phobia of people puking. because this wasn't the only time. I'd gotten sick a couple of other times, and so literally, and it was always in front of my sister. But this one was the real capper because I just couldn't make it out the window, and it was like all over. It smelled, and that smell I think stayed with my sister. And then anytime throughout college and even beyond that anybody even showed signs of getting sick, it would freak her out. She had a legitimate phobia of somebody getting sick. So I thank you, Death Wish 2 and the Royal Hawaiian for getting me sick.
Death Wish is, in fact, the only Michael Winner film I've ever seen.
Maybe it was a couple years ago. I caught this film on TV that it was really bad, but for some reason I decided to just go with it and watch the whole thing. Probably because I had a premonition we'd be doing a show like this someday, and I better have a story. It was called Scorpio, and it has Burt Lancaster, and he's kind of a CIA agent. Go ahead. It's a great story, but it's executed poorly, and that's what I think was so fascinating. It felt to me that we think of the 70s as this time of amazing films, and it is, and it's probably, I think, the best decade for film. And yet we forget that week in, week out, there were barrels of crappy movies being put out.
Yeah, just junk being turned out.
Yeah, but so it has Burt Lancaster, and it's sort of this cat and mouse with a foreign agent played by Alain Delon, and he's essentially playing his Le Samurai character.
I'm actually a big fan of a lot of the Charles Bronson, Alain Delon movies that they made together. They made a string of them. And one of them is Red Samurai, Red Samurai is the one where also Toshiro Mifune's in it. And it's very weird. I'm trying to think. I think Michael Winner may have done that as well. And I mean, just a weird cast. Charles Bronson, Alain Delon, and Toshiro Mifune.
What's it called?
I think it's called Red Sun.
Red Sun from 1971.
Okay.
I just looked it up. Terrence Young directed it.
Best experiences I ever had watching his stuff was obviously Once Upon a Time in the West, which I got to see up on the big screen one time. And that was just, I went in, it was sort of like you were saying, how sometimes you go in and you really have no idea about a movie. I just knew, that this was not one of the Dollars trilogy movies. I think this was maybe 1990. Charles Bronson at this point was I think had done Death Wish 5 or something. So he was really kind of not held in high regard, kind of, at the end of his career at this point. And seeing Once Upon a Time in the West just absolutely floored me. That whole opening sequence, the sound of the well that's sort of turning.
Oh, yeah.
Frank? Frank sent us. Did you bring a horse for me? Well, looks like we're shy of one horse. You brought too many.
The great movies, you can watch them anywhere, anytime, and they'll hold up. But even if I've seen a film 100 times and it's all been on home, if I get an opportunity to see a favorite film of mine on the big screen, I go because there's an impact that you get when you're seeing images projected on this giant screen. And sometimes it's not just that and the sound and all the things that go with that, but the audience can really change the experience. I recently saw a film that I know, Teal, that you've seen, and I think that you, Bill, may have seen it too. While watching it, I was constantly thinking, man, this would have been a lot more fun to watch had I seen it in the theater with the big packed crowds coming in to see this film, because this is the kind of movie where an audience gets into it, starts shouting, starts cheering, and it adds a dimension that is completely absent when you watch it at home. And that would be the new movie, the director David Gordon Green's version of Halloween.
Yeah. And it's not necessarily a version. It's a direct sequel to the first film.
Yeah.
As though all the other films never happened.
I kind of think of it as a reboot in that it's rebooting the entire series, saying, yeah, you know what? All those other movies you went through, forget them. We're going right from 1 to 2.
I totally agree that this is the kind of movie that benefits from an audience, because horror movies depend on getting a visceral reaction from the viewer. When you share that reaction with other people, it's much more powerful and evocative and involving, engaging. I guess there are some movies that are scary if you watch them alone at home with the lights off. But slasher movies to me have always been crowd movies.
My son actually saw this in the theater. I was watching this last night. I asked him if he had seen it before. And I remember, had gone out to see it with a group of friends. And they went to go see it like opening night.
Yeah.
And they were all amped up to enjoy it. So, yeah, he said he had a great time.
So they enjoyed it. Yeah. Okay.
You first saw it, but you didn't tell me anything about you didn't really give me any of your reaction. So I want to get your thoughts first.
Wait, I'm going first?
Yeah. Well, you're the first one to see it. I don't want you to be influenced by anything I will say. I want to be influenced by you.
I have to look at this movie within its genre, which, and I guess maybe it's not even really a subgenre, but it's a teen slasher movie. Through and through, it follows those tropes where there is a strong, almost indestructible villain who is sort of acting beyond human capability or thought. They're almost a supernatural force coming and just slaughtering people. And it's done for shock and terror and fear. And so this movie, to me, hit all those notes perfectly. To me, this is a great teen slasher movie. It within the genre, it scared me at times. And one thing I really liked about this movie was Jamie Lee Curtis as the grandmother with PTSD, who is really trying to be the smart horror movie character that you don't really see in this. Usually in slasher movies, the main characters are kind of dumb, with the exception of maybe the final girl. And I guess this is a new kind of final girl. So anyway, those are my sort of general thoughts.
Okay. Do you have anything to add at the moment, Bill?
It is a genre piece. The one thing I can say about it, it's somewhat kind of knowing and ironic about what it is. And, I thought it was, it had a pretty good setup. I thought, there were a couple of set pieces that were really, really good. I thought the gas station scene was really well done. Final conflict and everything, I just thought was, I thought that was all handled fairly well. Yeah.
And now we come to me. Well, first of all, I should say that I personally don't like David Gordon Green. I think he's not a very good director. I've seen a bunch of his films, and I don't really like any of them. And yet he keeps getting a lot of work.
Can I agree? Can I agree with that?
I'd love you to agree. Agree with me is always a good way to go.
Watching Pineapple Express the other day, and I put it off. It's just and
that's one of his better movies.
I couldn't even have it on in the background.
That's the only movie of... Oh, no, I saw George Washington. Those are the only movies of his I've seen, are George Washington and Pineapple Express. So I don't feel like I've seen enough to say whether I like it or not.
I think you're mistaken. I know for a damned fact, sir, that you are a Jake Gyllenhaal completionist. And if that is the case, then you've seen Stronger.
You're right. I have seen Stronger. Okay.
That's right. And yep. I come from Massachusetts originally. I was there for the entire week-long saga of the Boston Marathon bombing. And so I knew that story very well, and I was very excited to see it. And I just thought it was handled so horribly.
Yeah, I agree.
And I don't know, you didn't see that movie, Our Brand is Crisis?
No.
Oh, it's horrible. Did you ever see that movie, The Sitter?
No.
It's a really terrible remake of sorts of Adventures in Babysitting, which I know that you and I like. Your Highness is almost unwatchable. Snow Angels has some moments, and George Washington, which is critically acclaimed and is really the reason why he has a career at all, I couldn't get through the first 15 minutes. It's so boring.
What about Joe?
I haven't seen Joe. I will admit I haven't seen Joe. That's another Nicolas Cage classic. That's probably the reason why I didn't see it. I was like, Joe and David Gordon Green.
Okay, so you don't like him as a director.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So that was just a preface, is that I don't normally like him.
Right. We're just getting
now. Okay, so he's tackling this, Halloween, which, to be fair, every movie, with the exception of maybe like part 2, has been horrible. I've seen a bunch of them. I haven't seen every Halloween.
They're terrible. They're all terrible.
Every once in a while, I get sucked in thinking this is going to be the time they're going to make a good one. I remember working in the 90s with a kid who was a huge Halloween fan, and we both, after work, went to see Halloween H2O on its opening day. And I was so disappointed, and so was he. At the end, I was like, this is horrible. So that was the last time they roped Jamie Lee Curtis into coming back. And then there's been others, and I was really looking forward. I thought that Rob Zombie, as much as I may revile the House of a Thousand Corpses,
but you think maybe he could do something interesting with it.
House of a Thousand Corpses shows the promise of a really interesting filmmaker, and then The Devil's Rejects, I have to say, for as off-putting a lot of the content is, I watched the way he constructed some scenes, especially the finale of that movie, and I remember walking away from it saying, this guy is one to watch. And then suddenly, ever since The Devil's Rejects, I realized it was a fluke, and this guy doesn't even know. And so when he was going to remake Halloween, I thought, here's a guy who could do it. And then it was horrible.
Yeah, terrible.
So now we have a Halloween fan in David Gordon Green and his partner in crime there. What's his name?
Danny McBride.
Thank you. This is why we're having another special guest on the show to fill in when I have my memory lapses. This movie cost $10 million to make. Pretty low budget. In today's world, it made $225 million worldwide. So that's amazing, right?
Huge hit.
How much money would it have cost the studios? $500,000 to $1 million, maybe, to have shot this on film instead of digital?
Yeah, no, I'll take that point. I think that the movie would have been better if it was shot on film, because it's going for kind of a film look. It would have been great if it was shot on 16.
Jimmy, what's the aspect ratio?
It's 2:3:5, but the original was 2:3:5.
Isn't that Carpenter's always trying to go?
Yeah,
he's always wants widescreen.
However, this is, and I don't know, maybe Dean Cundey is retired. I don't know, but if you guys, again, if these guys are supposed to be such big fans of the movie, I would start thinking, you got Carpenter involved to do the music, which was a master stroke, because it's all the familiar notes, and yet there's some different stuff in it, but it feels more like it's part of the universe, and so I really like that, and there are homages, in a good way, I actually think, to the first film that work. And I personally love that they did a shout out to Halloween 3 with the Halloween 3 masks.
Yes.
So, I mean, there's some stuff to like. And of course, another thing that I thought was great is they got 76-year-old Nick Castle Jr. to reprise his role as the Shape for a few scenes. And I couldn't tell you exactly which ones he wasn't in, but like there's those moments that the physicality of the person who was the original Mike Myers, who he only was the Mike Myers in the first movie, it just makes a difference. So I liked all that. However, if they could have gotten Dean Cundey to shoot anamorphic, that Panasonic with that sort of stretched, there's a little bit of a stretched look, and on film, that would have brought it right into the universe. And also, when you're working with film, maybe you have to take a little bit more planning and you don't overdo it. I feel like the digital allows you to rush and do a lot of crazy things, and you don't really think through. And that's where the original cut, I guess, of the movie was 2 hours and 15 minutes, and they had to cut a lot of stuff out. So
interesting. So it does feel rushed at times. Part
of the great charm in the first movie, and why no other version has come close, it's because they were working on the shoeiest of shoestring budget. And so they had to be inventive. He had to be very, very careful about plotting his shots and what kind of coverage he could get. And there wasn't going to be a lot of gore because he couldn't do that. And this movie, it just goes so far in Mike Myers killing 1,000 people. And it's like...
That's the premise. He's just on a killing spree in this movie. It's not even just like a group of teenagers. He's just walking into random people's houses and killing them.
Yeah, I like maybe a little of it. It's that they then start setting up these teenagers as if like you're going to maybe just have them be killed. And believe me, a couple of these teenagers, you can't wait for them to get killed, which is in keeping.
Well, it does these like long dialogue scenes with the threat of violence underneath them. Sometimes the violence comes and sometimes it doesn't.
Again, I agree with you. You have to kind of review this in terms of its genre, and I had an enjoyable time. As a matter of fact, sitting on the couch with the wife, we're throwing some jokes around. Like it's actually a movie I never found scary, but I found that it was kind of fun to throw out some gags. But tell me, because maybe I just didn't quite get this. You know the babysitter, and she's babysitting the kid, which is a throwback to the first movie. A couple of things, and it bothered me a little bit. First of all, is that when the babysitter comes on, is that the first time we've met the babysitter, or was she a friend of Laurie Strode's granddaughter?
I believe she was a friend.
I think she's a friend, yeah.
I guess because it wasn't set up well, it was kind of like, okay, here's this babysitter scene now.
This is something that got cut out.
Maybe it was, right. But this is what happens is when it becomes confusing to an audience. Yeah. And I'm sitting there going, why is Mike Myers going to that house? Was this house one of the houses from the first movie?
Oh, I see. You were actually trying to think there was meaning to this.
Well...
Whereas I was watching it as just like, this guy is just a force of nature coming through a neighborhood. It's totally random. Like, that's kind of what's supposed to be scary about it, is that it could just be anyone sitting in their house.
But I would agree, except that the script...
Isn't that what the psychiatrist almost kind of also is sort of saying as well?
But that's the problem, right? Now, Bill, you just said something that was, this is where it hinges in the script. And I thought this is where the movie was interesting, and yet it didn't really explore that. So the psychiatrist sets up this interesting thing with the podcasters at the beginning of the movie where he says that Mike Myers can understand you and he can speak, he just chooses not to. Now, right off the bat, I'm saying to myself, now that's interesting. I kind of want to see where do we go with that. Like, does Mike Myers...
And it doesn't explore it. You're right.
It doesn't. Instead, it goes to what you just said. He becomes just some menacing killer who's just off to kill anything. So either the psychiatrist is just wrong. They kind of didn't explore that. Like, for instance, with the bus crash where all the patients go out, was there an earlier scene of how that happened? Or do we just supposed to not know? I don't, I mean, I'm sitting there as I'm a viewer going, it's interesting choice that we come across that.
Well, if they cut a half hour out of the movie, there's going to be some gaps like that in the script.
Like, I guess what I also thought would have been interesting is if Laurie Strode, you know how you see her watching the bus leave?
Yeah.
What I thought would have been kind of interesting is if her unhinged desire to kill Mike Myers and have her opportunity, if she somehow accidentally causes the bus crash, that would have been interesting.
Right. The movie could have been a lot more interesting. It could have had a lot more depth. But again, to me, it's a teen slasher movie. Is it better than I Know What You Did Last Summer? Yeah, quite a bit.
Oh, well, yeah, come on. We can't compare movies like that. Stop.
No, I'm trying to think of like what, of course, the original Halloween is like the great teen slasher movie of all time. But, what are some other great ones? This to me is one of the best ones I've seen in years.
I just wanted to make one observation about Jamie Lee Curtis. She looked to me like Michael Caine in Children of Men.
Yeah, there was a scene where they were at the school dance and that boyfriend throws her phone into like some kind of slop. And my wife was on the couch. She said, "Hey, is that yogurt? Where's Jamie Lee Curtis right now?" As this movie's getting on, it's getting a little ridiculous, especially where Jamie Lee Curtis is prepared all this time for Mike Myers' return, and she's got this house all booby-trapped. But then, of course, the second...
Does everything wrong.
She does everything wrong. So I'm sitting there saying, well, what the hell? But my wife makes an interesting observation, and she said, well, isn't that the best part about it, is that she has been traumatized, and all these years she's not been making good decisions. She isn't planning in her mind one way, but she's not really planning it properly.
Exactly, because she's traumatized.
I mean, I would have liked it if instead of the way that they chose with the family, what if well, maybe she's estranged, but we don't see
Right.
Jamie Lee Curtis. There's nothing. And then he comes back to the town. He is going to the old stomping grounds where it turns out that, the kids are in jeopardy. But then maybe halfway through the film, she knows he's going to show up and she comes popping out and starts, like it would have been fun to have her being revealed much later, ready to kick ass or something.
Right. And maybe hunting him a little bit more. She's very defensive. I kind of wanted her to go on the offense at some point.
There were things to like about it. It had an opportunity to be great that they wasted.
I still enjoyed it. You're right. It had an opportunity to be great, and it's not great, but it is, I don't know.
It is what it is.
It is what it is, yeah. I recommend it to people that are into horror movies.
Especially we'll say here this: if you love Mike Myers movies, you can't get enough of them. This would be one of the best ones.
I think it's one of the best ones. Yeah.
I have a friend who saw this, and he was all excited, and he was tweeting me from the theater saying, "This is the biggest bag." I don't know what he was expecting, but he was angry about how much he hated it. So when you had said that. I'm watching it. I think it's kind of good. I was surprised because I was expecting to really hate it. Didn't hate it, but I have a lot of gripes.
Yeah.
I don't know. So, who knows? See it, don't see it. And again, I think there's more things I could get into with this film about some of the issues I had with that psychiatrist and some of the plot twists there that I wasn't a fan of that.
A lot of those issues, though, just make me want to see a longer cut. I think that a lot of the issues you're pointing out with the script and those little moments of confusion or lack of motivation are probably solved in a longer cut. They were probably in the script. Because it feels rushed. It feels like there's things missing and motivations that aren't there.
What I did like, again, these are just the things that didn't get explored in the film that I saw. Maybe they were on the cutting room floor, but I do like the idea of what the psychiatrist points out, that the impact that traumatic events have on the survivors, whether it be Michael Myers or Laurie Strode, or as you got hints at the end of the movie, a little subtle twist of a knife, it may have that cycle of trauma might
continue. Yeah.
I like that. I just think that would have been more of an interesting thing to explore. And I also think there was an opportunity that I would have loved to have heard Mike Myers utter one thing.
Right at the end, right before he died.
When he looks up at her, it would have been great. I don't know. It would have been just great if he went, "Fuck you." I don't know. I don't know what he's supposed to say, but I feel
That's the problem is nothing he could say would be good enough, and we'd be complaining that he said that.
Yeah, maybe.
Rosebud.
Yeah. Like if he was a jokester, like he's been waiting to say something.
Just said Rosebud at the end. Yeah.
It's funny that we, are talking about a movie like this, but on this program, you just never know what we're going to talk about.
It's whatever we happen to have watched.
Yeah. Well, no, we'll talk about other things too, but it's nice to talk about films that are kind of out there now that people might want to explore.
Well, I recommend Halloween to horror movie fans.
Okay. Recommendation of the week sorts is Halloween from Teal. Do you got any recommendations that we should be thinking of, Bill, before we part ways?
No, nothing really recently that I've seen. I've got 5 kids, so I usually, I saw the Spider-Verse, basically the same stuff that you guys have kind of listed through. So
did you like that Spider-Verse movie?
I did, very much.
Me too.
Yeah, no, I like that a lot.
A couple of quick things before we wrap up. Some housekeeping from the last episode, the Oscar episode. Green Book is actually playing this week at my theater. They got it, so I am going to try to see it this weekend. And then also, my wife pointed out that on the program, we went through the animated short subjects, and I said I didn't know what any of them were, and she said, that's incorrect. The short film or animated film Bow is that little dumpling movie that was at the beginning of Incredibles 2.
Oh.
The cute little dumpling,
Yeah, the cute little dumpling movie.
Yeah,
okay.
So I was wrong. I have seen that movie.
I have one correction from the last episode, too.
Okay.
And I have to say this because I know that the kind of people who will make this correction will let me know. Venom is not part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Okay.
Because Venom comes from Sony. And Sony has loaned Spider-Man to the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but they still own Venom. And so Venom is not technically a Kevin Feige movie, or Kevin Feige, or whatever the hell his name is. It's not part of the MCU. And so I just have to correct this because I said that it was, and I know people, I don't want the death threats.
Yeah. Because, you know, this could go viral and then people are going to be outraged. I get you.
Yeah. I just want to nip the outrage in the bud right now. Yeah.
Hey, by the way, what about that Bohemian Rhapsody? Maybe made any inroads into seeing that film since we last spoke?
Wait, are we going to talk about that now?
Well, do you want to talk about it another time?
Yes.
Okay, then we won't talk about it.
Because I have a lot to say.
Okay, so you saw it.
Oh, I saw it.
Okay, we're going to leave that as sort of a cliffhanger.
But I actually think when we talk about it, we're going to talk about rock and roll biopics in general and how this is one of the worst ones.
Okay, I like where you're going with that because I think we have a story that we've been waiting to tell, and we can tell that in that rock and roll biopic section.
Exactly.
Cool. So listen, very special thanks to our guest. Our first one that we've ever had on the program is Bill from Queens. Hope you had a good time.
Thank you.
It was great to have you, Bill. Loved your stories.
Really, my pleasure. Thank you.
We want you on again, but you got to get a better microphone next time.
Go see some movies, and then we'll have you on again.
Listen. I've everything that you guys have mentioned. I've really tried to see. I really want to see the stuff by the guy, The Field in England, the one you were talking about.
Oh yeah, you might be into him.
I think I would.
You should see Free Fire. You might like that one.
No, I think I would like them all.
Yeah, see Kill List first.
Okay.
But you should see The Rider.
Yeah, The Rider is probably the best movie of 2018.
Right.
Yeah, we know a woman who's listened to the show, and she took our advice on The Rider and loved it.
She was in tears.
I'm gonna check it out. I saw The Lobster also.
Oh, good. Okay, I haven't seen it yet, so.
I really enjoyed it.
Oh, you like The Lobster?
I did.
Great.
I did. But I think I actually liked Killing of a Sacred Deer better.
Interesting. And I saw, again, you know, we're talking about kids, Yorgos Lanthimos.
We seem to talk about on every episode.
Yeah, but
now.
you know what? He's that guy that it's sort of the soup du jour. And my wife and I, we want to get our hands on anyone we can. And we saw Alps, which, since you haven't seen it, I really don't want to get into it too much. But it's definitely a Yorgos movie. And now that I've seen 4 of his films, I see where the connection points are. And it's a very weird meditation on what it is to grieve. So I thought that, you know, again, he's sort of fascinated by maybe people who have interesting professions. All right. Well, on that note, everybody,
let's wrap it up.
We're going to wrap it up. But until the next time, remember, feedback at jimandteal.com. Certainly on any of the places that you might listen to us. Feel free to subscribe, leave comments. Good ones, I hope. Ratings, all that stuff. I don't know why. We're supposed to say these things at the end of the show, right? So I'm saying them.
Yeah.
You know. But anyways, have a great whatever, people. Goodbye.
Watch movies. Bye-bye.
Bye.